He thought he held all the cards. At the peak of New York Fashion Week, the most photographed event of the year, Gideon Vance was ready to unveil his new life. On his arm wasn't his quiet, unassuming wife, but his dazzling mistress, a woman he was proudly introducing as his future. He was moments away from a promotion that would cement his legacy. But in a world built on image and power, the most devastating secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. What happens when the woman you cast aside is revealed to be the one who owns your entire world? Get ready for a story of betrayal, public humiliation, and epic revenge that proves you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and simmering resentment. Gideon Vance adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, showing a man carved from ambition. Tonight was the apex of his career, the culmination of a decade spent clawing his way up the corporate ladder at Aurelian Vanguard, the global luxury fashion conglomerate. The annual Vanguard Gala, the centerpiece of New York Fashion Week, was his stage. And tonight, he would finally shed the last vestige of his old, unremarkable life. That life was currently standing by the doorway to their master bedroom, holding a lint roller. Catherine, his wife of 12 years. "You have a little something on your shoulder, dear," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic, as if his perfection was a shared responsibility, and she had somehow failed in her part. Gideon didn't turn. He just glanced at his reflection, a flicker of irritation crossing his handsome face. "I've got it, Catherine." He brushed at the invisible speck on his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The suit was a statement. It screamed power, success, and a future she was not part of. Catherine retreated slightly, the lint roller held in her hand like a useless talisman. She was dressed in a simple, elegant but forgettable navy blue dress. It was the kind of dress women wore when they didn't want to be noticed, when their primary function was to be a supportive shadow. For 12 years, she had played that role to perfection. She had organized his life, hosted his dull but necessary business dinners, remembered the birthdays of his superiors' children, and celebrated his every minor victory as if it were the moon landing. She had been the perfect, quiet, background-dwelling wife, and he was so incredibly tired of it. "Is the car ready?" he asked, his tone clipped. He picked up his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Crystal, a picture of her in a shimmering, backless silver gown. The caption read, "Ready to be unveiled, my love. XOXO. A slow, predatory smile touched Gideon's lips. "It's been waiting downstairs for 10 minutes, Catherine replied. He could hear the faint tremor in her voice. She wasn't stupid. She knew something had been wrong for months. The late nights he no longer bothered to explain, the scent of a different perfume on his shirts, the cold chasm that had opened between them in their king-sized bed. But she never confronted him. That was the thing about Catherine. She was pathologically conflict-averse. She absorbed his neglect and cruelty with a quiet, maddening stoicism. "Good," he said, pocketing his phone. "I'm heading out." He finally turned to face her. He allowed his gaze to sweep over her, from her sensible low heels to her neatly pinned brown hair. There was nothing wrong with her. She was pleasant-looking, gentle. But she was wallpaper, in a world of vibrant, clashing, statement-making art. She was beige wallpaper. He was a masterpiece, trapped in a beige room. "You look nice," he offered, the compliment as empty as the promises he'd made at their wedding. "You look incredible, Gideon," she said, and her sincerity was like a dull ache in his chest. "I hope you have a wonderful night. I know how important it is." for the head of North American Operations promotion. "It's practically mine," he cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. "Bartholomew Finch is retiring. He practically told me the job was mine last week. Tonight is just the coronation." He wanted that title more than he had ever wanted anything. It was the key to everything: the power, the respect, the life he truly deserved. A life with a woman like Crystal, a woman who shone as brightly as he did. He walked towards the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He felt a fleeting, minuscule pang of something that might have been guilt, but he crushed it. This was necessary. Evolution. A snake shedding its skin. "Don't wait up," he said. The words a final, casual severance. He didn't look back as he stepped out of the apartment, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, sealing her inside their gilded cage. He didn't see her flinch, didn't see the way her shoulders slumped, or the way she brought a trembling hand to her lips. He didn't see the single tear that traced a path down her cheek before she deliberately, methodically, wiped it away. He saw only the future, and it was glittering, silver, and waiting for him in the back of another car downtown. As Gideon's elevator descended, Catherine walked over to the vast window overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan glittered below, a galaxy of ambition and dreams. His dream was to conquer it. He never once stopped to ask what hers was. She picked up her own phone, not the simple one she used for groceries and daily reminders, but a sleek, encrypted device hidden in her study. She scrolled to a single contact, marked only with a single initial, B. She typed a short, simple message. "He's on his way." "Are we ready?" The reply came back in seconds. "The stage is set, Madam Chairwoman. We are ready." Catherine took a deep, steadying breath. The first truly full breath she'd felt she'd taken in years. She looked at her reflection, not in the dark glass of the window, but in the polished screen of the device in her hand. The reflection of the woman in the simple navy dress flickered, and for a moment she saw the Queen underneath. Tonight wasn't Gideon's coronation. It was hers. The grand atrium at the Metropolitan Arts Pavilion was a cathedral of modern excess. Soaring white marble columns held up a glass ceiling that revealed the bruised twilight sky. Orchestral music drifted through the air, a classy veneer over the raw, seething ambition of the crowd below. This was the beating heart of New York Fashion Week, and Gideon Vance felt its rhythm in his blood. He made his entrance not with a bang, but with a calculated, seismic shockwave. On his arm was Crystal Monroe. She was everything Catherine was not, draped in a liquid silver gown that seemed poured onto her statuesque frame. Crystal was a supernova. Her hair was a cascade of platinum blonde. Her smile was a weapon, and her eyes scanned the room with the hungry appraisal of a predator who knows she's the most dangerous thing in the jungle. Every camera flash seemed to find them, the frantic clicks creating a wall of sound that was music to Gideon's ears. He saw the whispers start immediately. He saw Penelope Graves, the city's most feared fashion blogger, her fingers already flying across her phone's screen, her expression a mixture of shock and glee. He saw his colleagues from Aurelian Vanguard, their eyes widening, some with disapproval, others with a grudging respect for his sheer audacity. This was more than just bringing a date. This was a declaration of intent, a public execution of his marriage. "Darling, everyone is staring," Crystal purred, pressing herself closer to him. Her touch was electric, a jolt of validation. "Let them stare," Gideon murmured, his voice low and confident. He steered her towards the main champagne bar, his hand possessively on the small of her back. "Tonight we give them something to talk about for the rest of the year." He felt powerful, untouchable. He had outgrown Catherine, outgrown the quiet, respectable life she represented. That life was a starter home. He was ready for the palace. Crystal was the queen he had chosen to install. "Gideon!" What a surprise! The voice belonged to Howard Finch, the son of the outgoing chairman, a man whose position was built on nepotism rather than talent. Howard's eyes darted from Gideon to Crystal and back again, a sly, knowing smirk on his face. "And who is this vision?" Gideon's smile widened. This was the moment, the first brick in his new empire. "Howard, I'd like you to meet Crystal Monroe, my muse," he said, loading the word with significance. "Crystal, this is Howard Finch." "Charmed," Crystal said, extending a hand, her voice a husky whisper that promised secrets and sin. "The pleasure is all mine," Howard oozed, already captivated. "A muse, you say? I wasn't aware you were looking for new inspiration, Gideon. Where has Catherine been hiding tonight?" The question was a barb, and Gideon felt it, but he parried it with effortless arrogance. "Catherine is indisposed," he said, his tone suggesting a delicate, private matter, rather than a brutal discarding. "She understands that my work requires a certain public-facing dynamism. Crystal embodies the new direction I envision for Aurelian Vanguard." It was a bold, almost treasonous statement. He was already speaking as if he were in charge, redefining the company's image in his own. He was laying claim to the throne in front of the prince. They moved through the crowd, a vortex of glamour and gossip. Gideon introduced Crystal to designers, to editors from Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, to the moneymen who kept the gears of the fashion world turning. With each introduction, he solidified her position, and by extension, his own. He used phrases like the future face of the brand and a new era of inspiration. He was writing a new narrative for himself in real time, and Crystal was his co-author. She played her part with masterful precision. She was charming, witty, and deferential enough to the right people, while exuding an aura of untouchable stardom. She spoke of Gideon's genius, his unparalleled vision, and how he was unshackled now to truly achieve his destiny. They were a team, a power couple forged in ambition and presented to the world for its adoration. Gideon spotted Penelope Graves watching them from near a marble pillar, her expression unreadable. He decided to confront the narrative head-on. Leading Crystal over, he greeted the blogger with a disarming smile. "Penelope, always a pleasure. I see you've noticed the evening's main event." Penelope's eyes, sharp as a tailor's needles, took in the sight of them. "Gideon, you've certainly made a statement, a rather bold one. The press corps is having a field day. Gideon Vance debuts new muse as wife is a no-show. Is that the headline you were hoping for?" "The right headline writes itself when the story is compelling enough," Gideon retorted smoothly. "Aurelian Vanguard isn't about playing it safe. It's about vision, passion, and daring to embrace the future. That's what Crystal represents. That's what I represent." He was high on his own audacity. The champagne, the flashing lights, the intoxicating presence of Crystal on his arm. It all combined into a potent drug. He felt like a king surveying his court, completely unaware that the ground beneath his throne was about to crumble into a bottomless abyss. He was so focused on the spectacle of Crystal's arrival that he failed to notice the true arrivals of the evening. He didn't see the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the most powerful players, the board members, the old money investors, weren't looking at him and his glittering mistress. Their attention was being drawn elsewhere, towards the stage, where preparations were being made for an announcement that had nothing to do with the head of North American operations. It was an announcement that would redefine power in their world, and Gideon Vance, in his moment of supreme arrogance, was about to become a footnote in a story far grander and more terrible than he could ever imagine. The gala was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses, feigned laughter, and the relentless, unspoken jockeying for position. Gideon was at the center of his own storm, and he was reveling in the chaos. He held court near the towering ice sculpture of the Aurelian Vanguard logo, a triumphant smirk permanently affixed to his face. "The brand has become stagnant, you see," he explained to a trio of influential retailers, his voice pitched just loud enough to be overheard. "Bartholomew is a legend, but his time has passed. We need blood, we need fire. We need to appeal to a new generation that values authenticity and boldness." He gestured vaguely towards Crystal, who was laughing with a famous film director nearby. "We need a narrative that feels alive." The retailers, men in their late 60s who had seen ambitious young executives come and go, nodded politely, their expressions non-committal. They had heard this speech before, in various forms, from countless young Turks who thought they had reinvented the wheel. But Gideon's confidence was infectious, and the very public drama he had orchestrated lent his words a certain weight. He wasn't just talking about change, he was embodying it. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Gregory Thorne, the company's chief financial officer, a man whose personality was as grey as his suit. "Gideon, a word?" Gideon sighed internally but maintained his polished exterior. "Gregory, enjoying the party?" "It's an expensive party," Gregory said, his eyes humorless. "Listen, Gideon, what you're doing here, it's risky. The board values stability, tradition, publicly shaming your wife, a woman who has been nothing but graceful, while cozying up to, well, it's not a good look." Gideon let out a short, sharp laugh. "Gregory, my friend, you're a numbers man. You don't understand branding. Good looks are manufactured. I'm manufacturing a new one. Power isn't about stability anymore. It's about disruption. And Catherine represents stability. A quiet, comfortable, and utterly boring stability. That's not the future. She isn't the future." He said the final words with such dismissive finality that even Gregory, a man known for his stoicism, seemed taken aback. "Be that as it may," the CFO said, lowering his voice. "Old Mr. Finch is a great admirer of your wife. He speaks of her fondly. He might not appreciate this spectacle." "Bartholomew appreciates results," Gideon countered, his patience wearing thin. "And he knows I'm the only one with the guts to deliver them. He's about to name me his successor. A little spectacle will be forgiven when I double our stock price in the next 18 months. Gregory shook his head slowly, a grin set to his mouth. "Just be careful what you wish for, Gideon. The marble floors in this place are beautiful, but they're slippery." With that cryptic warning, the CFO melted back into the crowd. Gideon scoffed, dismissing the man as a relic. He scanned the room for Crystal and saw her in a deep conversation with a journalist from the New York Times. Perfect. She was planting the seeds, framing the narrative just as they had rehearsed. The story of the brilliant, stifled executive and his liberating new muse. The story of Gideon Vance, unleashed. He found himself drifting near a conversation between two of the board's oldest members, a pair of sisters, the formidable Henderson twins, who had inherited their father's seat and his skepticism. "Unprecedented," one was saying to the other. "To keep it quiet for so long, the discipline, the sheer audacity of it." "Father always said the Delacroix family were a different breed," the other replied, her voice a low conspiratorial hum. "They play the long game. They never show their hand until they're holding a royal flush." Gideon frowned, catching the name. Delacroix. He knew the name, of course. It was a legendary name in the world of European finance and textiles, a name synonymous with old-world power and unimaginable wealth. The family was notoriously reclusive, their empire managed through proxies and labyrinthine holding companies. Aurelian Vanguard itself was a subsidiary of one of those larger, more anonymous conglomerates. He had never given it much thought, other than knowing their ultimate benefactor was a shadowy, powerful entity. He assumed the Henderson twins were discussing some arcane business deal, some shift in the parent company's portfolio that had no bearing on his own imminent ascension. His world at that moment was blissfully small, revolving entirely around himself, his ambition, and the woman in the silver dress. He refilled his champagne flute, the bubbles fizzing against the crystal, mirroring the effervescent thrill in his veins. He was so close, the culmination of everything he had worked for, schemed for, and sacrificed for. He thought of Catherine again, a fleeting image of her in that drab navy dress. He imagined her at home, perhaps watching a dull documentary or reading a book, blissfully unaware that her world was being dismantled and auctioned off to the highest bidder. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. She had served her purpose. She had been the stable, respectable wife who helped him climb. But one does not take the ladder to the summit with them. One kicks it away so no one else can follow. The lights in the atrium began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd. On stage, a podium was illuminated by a single, brilliant spotlight. Gideon's heart began to hammer in his chest. This was it. He found Crystal's hand and pulled her close, their bodies aligned as they turned to face the stage. "Showtime," he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with triumph. She squeezed his hand, her painted nails digging slightly into his skin. "Our show, darling," she corrected him. "Don't ever forget that." Oh, he wouldn't. He looked out at the sea of faces, turned towards the stage, all of them witnesses to his victory. The whispers on the marble had all been about him. He was sure of it. He was the story. He was the moment. The universe, in its grand design, had conspired to bring him to this perfect, triumphant peak. He was utterly, blissfully, and catastrophically wrong. The man who walked into the spotlight was Bartholomew Finch. He was 80 years old, with a mane of white hair and a presence that commanded silence without him having to utter a word. He represented the old guard of fashion, a world of elegance, tradition, and quiet, unshakable power. His retirement was the end of an era, and the beginning, Gideon was certain, of his own. Bartholomew tapped the microphone, the soft sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Good evening, friends, colleagues, visionaries," he began, his voice a gravelly but warm baritone. "For 40 years, I have had the distinct honor of standing at the helm of Aurelian Vanguard. We have dressed movie stars and royalty. We have defined decades and weathered the storms of changing tastes. We have built more than a brand. We have built a legacy." The crowd applauded politely. Gideon stood a little straighter, a confident smile fixed on his face. He felt Crystal press against him, a silent signal of shared victory. "But legacy," Bartholomew continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "is not a monument to be admired. It is a living thing. It must be nurtured, it must be challenged, and at times it must be completely reimagined by a new and fearless leader." Gideon's heart hammered against his ribs. Fearless leader. He was describing him. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. They knew. Everyone knew. "Many of you are expecting me to announce my successor as CEO of Aurelian Vanguard tonight," Finch said, a sly twinkle in his eye. "And we will get to that. But first, there is a far more significant announcement to be made, one that concerns the very ownership and future direction of our parent company, the Delacroix Global Holdings. Gideon felt a flicker of confusion. Delacroix? Why was he talking about the holding company? It was a distant, faceless entity. He wanted to hear his name, to feel the applause wash over him. This was an unnecessary delay. As many of you know, the Delacroix family has always valued its privacy, Bartholomew explained. For the last 50 years, the empire has been managed by a board of trustees, awaiting the heir to come of age and decide to take their rightful place at the head of the table. That time has come. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unexpected. The reclusive Delacroix heir was taking control. This changed everything. The Henderson twins were now staring at the stage, their mouths slightly agape. They had known. Gideon's mind raced. What did this mean for him? Would a new, unknown owner honor Finch's choice for CEO? A knot of anxiety began to form in his stomach. This was not going according to his script. The heir is not some distant stranger, Finch's voice boomed, pulling Gideon from his spiraling thoughts. This individual has been among us for years, watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to claim what is theirs. A person who understands our world not from a spreadsheet, but from within. A person of immense strength, patience, and quiet resolve. Gideon scanned the faces of the most powerful people in the room. Was it one of them? Some European duke he'd never met? A banking scion working under a pseudonym? His confidence began to fray at the edges, the fine threads of his arrogance unraveling one by one. This transition of power has been in the works for over a year, Finch declared, his voice rising with theatrical gravity. And tonight, I have the profound and historic honor of ceding my position. Not just as CEO of Aurelian Vanguard, but as the interim chairman of the board for Delacroix Global Holdings. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The silence in the room was absolute, a perfect vacuum of anticipation and shock. "It is my great privilege," Bartholomew Finch said, his voice ringing with a mixture of reverence and triumph, "to introduce you to the new majority shareholder, the inheritor of the Delacroix fortune, and the new chairwoman of the entire global enterprise." Gideon held his breath. His entire future hung on the next few words. Finch smiled, a wide, genuine, and almost paternal smile, as he looked out into the crowd, his eyes seeming to find a specific spot in the shadows. "Please welcome Mrs. Catherine Delacroix Vance." The name struck Gideon with the physical force of a lightning bolt. Catherine Delacroix Vance. For a frozen second, the words did not compute. They were a random assemblage of sounds, a glitch in the audio system, a cruel joke. He turned his head slightly, a disbelieving frown creasing his brow, expecting to see some other, older, more formidable Catherine step out from the wings. But there was no one else. The name echoed in the profound silence of the atrium. Catherine Delacroix Vance, his Catherine, his quiet, mousy, wallpaper wife. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was... And then he saw her. She emerged not from the wings of the stage, but from a private corridor at the side of the hall, a path reserved for honored guests and royalty. The transformation was so absolute, so breathtaking, that it defied belief. Gone was the simple navy dress, the sensible shoes, the apologetic posture. The woman who walked into the soft glow of a follow spotlight was a queen. She wore a bespoke gown of emerald green silk that shimmered like a living thing, its cut severe and elegant. Diamonds, real and spectacular, glittered at her throat and ears. the legendary Delacroix emeralds, rumored to have been lost for a generation. Her hair, once pinned in a modest bun, was styled in a sleek, powerful chignon that highlighted the aristocratic lines of her face. But it was her expression that shattered Gideon's world. The gentle, accommodating softness was gone, replaced by a cool, unshakable composure. Her eyes, which had for years only reflected his own image back at him, now held a deep, ancient power. She walked with a grace and purpose he had never seen, her every step silent and deliberate on the marble floor. The sound in the room returned all at once, a tidal wave of gasps, frantic whispers, and the explosion of 100 camera flashes. Penelope Graves looked as though she had seen a ghost, her phone nearly slipping from her trembling fingers. Gregory Thorne, the CFO, simply nodded to himself, as if he had finally seen the punchline to a very long, very complicated joke. Howard Finch's jaw was on the floor. Gideon couldn't breathe. His lungs had seized, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He felt Crystal's hand go limp in his, then slip away entirely. He looked at her. The color had drained from her face, her vixen smile replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Her eyes darted between Gideon and the regal figure approaching the stage, the frantic calculations visible on her face. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Catherine reached the stage and ascended the small set of stairs, Bartholomew Finch extending a hand to her, which she took with a small, gracious nod. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect, before retreating to the side of the stage. Catherine stepped up to the podium. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed home. She adjusted the microphone, the small movement commanding more authority than any of Gideon's blustering speeches. Her eyes scanned the stunned audience, a sea of famous, powerful, and influential faces, all of them now utterly captivated by her. And then her gaze found Gideon. Across the vast, crowded room, their eyes locked. There was no hatred in her expression, no anger, no tears. There was something far worse, a calm, piercing, and utterly detached assessment. It was the look a scientist might give a specimen under a microscope, just before dissecting it. In that single, silent glance, she stripped him of everything. His arrogance, his ambition, his self-delusion. He was no longer the powerful executive, the master of his own destiny. He was just a man, small and insignificant, who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The whispers around him grew louder, a chorus of his own ruin. "Vance? Her name is Vance. She's married to him." My God, he brought his mistress. Did you see his face? He had no idea. The ultimate power move. She let him hang himself with his own rope. Crystal took a small, then a larger step away from him, then another. She was creating distance, disentangling herself from the wreckage. Gideon was radioactive, and she was fleeing the fallout zone. He stood frozen, a statue of hubris in a Tom Ford suit, as his wife, the woman he had dismissed as a footnote in his life, prepared to read his eulogy to the entire world. The thunder of her name was still ringing in his ears, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the storm had only just begun. Catherine's voice, when she finally spoke, was not loud, but it filled the cavernous hall with an astonishing clarity. It was the same soft voice she had used to ask him if he wanted coffee, but now it was imbued with a steely resonance that commanded absolute attention. "Thank you, Bartholomew," she began, her gaze leaving Gideon to address the crowd, "for your stewardship, for your friendship, and for keeping my family's legacy safe until I was ready to claim it." She then turned her attention to the assembled guests. "Many of you are surprised to see me here. For 12 years I have been content to live a quiet life. I believe that to truly understand an empire, one must first understand its people, not from a boardroom, but from the ground up. I have watched this company. I have studied its strengths and identified its weaknesses. And I have learned a great deal about character, about loyalty, and about betrayal. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Gideon felt each one pierce his skin. He was suffocating, drowning in the shocked and scornful stares of the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. He saw Crystal slipping through the crowd, her silver dress a streak of light as she fled towards the exit, a rat deserting a sinking ship. She didn't even give him a backward glance. Aurelian Vanguard, and indeed all of Delacroix Global Holdings, is entering a new era, Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength. An era of integrity, innovation, and strength. We will be cutting away the parts of this organization that have grown decadent, dishonest, or disloyal. We will reward talent and vision, but we will no longer tolerate arrogance and duplicity. Our future will be built on a foundation of respect. Effective immediately, the board has approved my proposed restructuring plan. A new wave of murmurs swept the room. She already had a plan. She had a board's approval. This wasn't a recent development. This had been in motion for months, perhaps years. While he was plotting his tawdry little affair and his petty promotion, she had been moving armies and redrawing maps. Her speech was brief, powerful, and visionary. She outlined a future for the company that was both exciting and ruthless. She finished by thanking everyone for their attendance and promised a new dawn for the company. The atrium erupted in thunderous applause. It was genuine, fervent applause for the unexpected queen who had just claimed her throne. As the applause subsided and the lights came up, a swarm of journalists and well-wishers surged towards the stage, all desperate for a word with the new empress of fashion. But Catherine held up a hand, and two large, impeccably dressed men from her security detail materialized, creating a clear path for her as she descended the stairs. She ignored the clamoring reporters, her eyes fixed on one target, Gideon. She walked towards him, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. The whispers died in her wake. The air crackled with tension. Gideon was rooted to the spot, a prisoner awaiting his sentence. She stopped a few feet from him. Up close, her transformation was even more profound. The power coming off her was a palpable force. "Hello, Gideon," she said, her voice now a low, private murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "Catherine, I don't understand," he stammered, his mind a vortex of confusion and terror. "Delacroix, your family." "My mother was the last direct heir," she explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. "When she and my father passed away, the estate was placed in trust until I turned 35, or until I felt I was ready to lead. I chose to wait. I wanted to live a normal life. I wanted to see if I could be loved for who I was, not for what I had. I wanted to see what kind of man I had married when he thought no one of consequence was watching." She paused, her eyes holding his. "And you showed me." The cold, simple truth of it crashed down on him. Their entire life together, his entire career, had been a test, a long, elaborate, 12-year character evaluation, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. "The promotion you were so sure about," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The position of head of North American operations. I dissolved it this afternoon. It's a redundant position, a vanity title." He flinched as if she had struck him. "Your shares in the company, which were granted as part of your executive compensation package, are subject to a morality clause. A clause that I personally drafted with our legal team 6 months ago. Publicly flaunting an affair while representing the company is, I believe, a flagrant violation. They will be forfeit. Of course, you are welcome to challenge it in court." A tiny ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My lawyers are the best in the world." He could say nothing. His throat was raw, his tongue a leaden weight in his mouth. "As for your employment," she said, delivering the final, fatal blow, "your services are no longer required at Aurelian Vanguard or any of its subsidiaries. Your access has been revoked. The contents of your office will be couriered to you, to your new address, wherever that may be." She motioned discreetly with her head. 2 more security men moved to flank Gideon. "These gentlemen will escort you from the premises," Catherine said, her tone final. "Your presence is no longer welcome." She turned to walk away, her back straight, her emerald gown flowing behind her. "Catherine, wait!" The desperate cry was torn from Gideon's throat. She stopped but didn't turn around. "After all we've been through, after everything, don't I deserve something?" he pleaded, his voice cracking, his entire world reduced to this one pathetic appeal. She paused for a long moment. Then she turned her head slightly, looking at him over her shoulder. Her expression was not one of pity, but of a strange, remote sadness, the kind one feels for a creature that has proven to be a profound disappointment. "You already had something, Gideon," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 wasted years. "You had everything, and you threw it all away for a cheap imitation." With that, she walked on, disappearing into the crowd of her new subjects, leaving Gideon Vance standing alone in the ruins of his life, with only his public humiliation and 2 security guards for company. The reckoning was complete. The weeks that followed the Vanguard Gala were a brutal education for Gideon Vance. The story was everywhere, an irresistible cocktail of wealth, betrayal, and revenge. Penelope Graves's blog post, titled "The Queen in the Navy Dress," went viral, cementing the narrative of the underestimated wife and the fool of a husband. Gideon became a pariah overnight. His name was a punchline in boardrooms and a cautionary tale at cocktail parties. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. His calls to headhunters went unreturned. He was professionally and socially bankrupt. Stripped of his company credit cards and access to their joint accounts, he was forced to move into a soulless corporate apartment, a stark contrast to the penthouse he had once called home. The boxes from his office arrived, filled with useless awards and photos of a life that no longer existed. He tried to call Crystal once, but her number was disconnected. A week later, he saw a paparazzi photo of her on the arm of a grizzled film producer in his 70s. She was a survivor, and he had been just a stepping stone on her path. Meanwhile, Catherine Delacroix Vance was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Vogue simultaneously. The world was fascinated by her story, but even more so by her actions. She was not a figurehead. She was a force. Her first act as chairwoman was to clean house. She systematically removed the executives who had thrived on sycophancy and backstabbing, promoting instead the quiet, brilliant designers and strategists Gideon had overlooked or actively suppressed. She axed his vanity projects, redirecting the funds into sustainable materials research and an apprenticeship program for underprivileged youth. She moved with a speed and precision that left the industry breathless. Her public persona was one of quiet authority and formidable intelligence. In interviews, she spoke not of her personal life, but of her vision for a more ethical and innovative future for fashion. When one bold journalist dared to ask about her ex-husband, her response was chilling in its finality. "My past is a private matter," she said, her expression unreadable. "My focus is on the future, and Mr. Vance is not in it." The message was clear. He had been erased. Catherine moved into the Delacroix ancestral home on the Upper East Side, a grand limestone mansion that had been kept dormant for decades. Her loyal assistant, Bernard, who had served her family for years while posing as a simple household manager, was now her official chief of staff. Together, they worked tirelessly, reshaping the global conglomerate in her image. One crisp autumn evening, months after the gala, Catherine stood in her new office on the top floor of the Aurelian Vanguard building. It was the same office Bartholomew Finch had occupied, but she had redecorated it completely. The dark mahogany and leather had been replaced with clean lines, modern art, and a vast glass wall that overlooked the glittering expanse of Manhattan. She held a glass of wine, not champagne, and looked down at the city lights. They were the same lights she had looked at from the penthouse she had shared with Gideon, but now the view was different. Before, she had been a spectator. Now, she was a master of this universe. There were moments, late at night, when a shadow of the past would touch her. A phantom ache for the man she thought she had married, the dream of a simple life she had once cherished. But the feeling was fleeting, like a cloud passing in front of the sun. The betrayal had been a brutal, painful fire, but it had burned away the illusions, leaving behind something harder, stronger, and far more real. It had forged her into the leader she was born to be. Bernard entered the office quietly, holding a tablet. "Madam Chairwoman, the quarterly projections are in. We are up 17% across all sectors." Catherine smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Bernard. A good start." "Indeed," he replied. "And a final piece of news. The law firm representing Mr. Vance contacted our legal team today. He is dropping his challenge to the forfeiture of his shares. They say he can no longer afford the legal fees." Catherine simply nodded, taking a slow sip of her wine. There was no triumph in her, no gloating. It was just a loose end being tied, a final chapter closing. Gideon Vance was no longer a villain or a ghost in her life. He was simply irrelevant, a faded photograph from a past she had long since transcended. She was Catherine Delacroix now, first and foremost. She had shed the name Vance, along with the woman who had worn it. She looked out at the endless city, at the dawn of her own empire, and felt not the weight of her legacy, but the lightness of her own limitless future. She was finally, completely, and gloriously free. 6 months had passed since the night the world turned on its axis. The vibrant chaos of autumn had given way to the stark, quiet beauty of a New York winter. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes outside the tall arched windows of Catherine Delacroix's private study, blanketing the city in a pristine layer of white. The mansion was quiet, a sanctuary of calm against the ceaseless hum of the empire she now commanded. The name Vance felt like something from another lifetime, a poorly fitting coat she had long since discarded. She was reviewing a proposal for a new sustainable textile factory in Scandinavia, her mind sharp and focused, when Bernard entered the room, his expression unusually troubled. "Madam Chairwoman," he began, his voice a low murmur. "You have a visitor. I told him you were unavailable, but he refuses to leave. He said he will wait in the snow all night if he has to." Catherine didn't look up from her papers. "I'm not expecting anyone." "Who is it?" Bernard hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It's Gideon Vance." Catherine's hand stilled. A flicker of something, not surprise, not anger, but a weary, distant memory, passed through her. She had expected this, in a way. Not today, not necessarily ever, but she knew his pride was a stubborn beast, and it would likely need one final definitive death before it released him. She had lawyers and security to handle this. A simple phone call and he would be gone, a non-entity once more. She looked out the window at the swirling snow, at the man she could just make out standing by the ornate front gates, a lone, dark figure without an umbrella, his shoulders dusted with white. He looked small against the grandeur of her home, against the vastness of the city. "Very well, Bernard," she said, her voice calm and even. "Show him into the west parlour. Give him a towel and some tea. I will be down in 5 minutes." Bernard's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he simply nodded. "As you wish, madam." As he left, Catherine stood and walked to the window, observing the pathetic figure for a moment longer. This wasn't a test for him. It was a test for her. Could she face the ghost of her past without flinching? Could she confront the man who had shattered her heart without letting a single crack show in the formidable woman she had become? She felt a profound, settling calm. Yes, she could. When she entered the west parlour, he was standing by the unlit fireplace, awkwardly holding a cup of tea. The change in him was shocking. The impeccably tailored suits were gone, replaced by a simple wool coat that hung loosely on his frame, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. He was thinner, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, haunted look. The sharp, predatory angles of his face had softened into a mask of weariness and defeat. He was no longer the king he had imagined himself to be. He was just a man who had lost his way. "Gideon," she said. Her voice didn't betray a single emotion. He flinched at the sound and turned to face her. "Catherine." Her name was a raw, broken thing on his tongue. "Thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" she asked, choosing to stand rather than sit, maintaining a sense of formal distance. "If this is about money, you should speak to my lawyers. If it's about anything else, I can't imagine we have anything left to discuss." "It's not about money," he said quickly, shaking his head. He placed the untouched tea on the mantelpiece, his hand trembling slightly. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I need to understand." "Understand what?" "The test," he said, his voice cracking. "Gregory Thorne told me. He said you were always watching. That our whole marriage was some kind of evaluation. Was any of it real? Or was I just some lab rat in your 12-year experiment?" Catherine looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the wreckage he had become. She felt not pity, but a profound, aching sadness for the waste of it all. "It was all real, Gideon," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "That was the tragedy of it. I didn't marry you as an experiment. I fell in love with a charming, ambitious, brilliant man whom I believed had a good heart. I loved him. I built a life for him. I was happy." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "The test, as you call it, didn't begin with a plan. It began with a disappointment. Then another. And another. It began when I saw your ambition start to curdle into arrogance. When your desire for success became a willingness to step on anyone to achieve it. When the man I married started to disappear, replaced by a stranger who wore his face and cared only for himself." Tears welled in Gideon's eyes. "So you just watched? You let me become that person? You never said anything." "What would I have said?" she countered, a touch of steel returning to her voice. "That your ambition was making you cruel. That the compliments you gave me were laced with condescension. That I knew you were lying about your late nights for a year before you even met Crystal. You wouldn't have listened. The Gideon I was married to by then had no respect for my opinion. My words would have been like the wind. So, yes, I watched, and I waited. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped the man I loved would come back. But he never did. He finally broke, a ragged sob escaping his throat. I lost everything? No, Catherine said, her voice firm but not unkind. You didn't lose it. You traded it. You traded my love for public adoration. You traded our life for a promotion you thought you deserved. You traded a genuine partnership for a cheap imitation with a woman who valued your position, not your person. Those were your choices, Gideon. Not my test. He finally looked up, his face a ruin of regret. What do I do now? It was the question of a lost child, and it was the one thing she could not answer for him. She walked towards the door, her part in this final, painful conversation over. You start again, she said, her hand on the doorknob. And this time, you build a life based on something real, on character, on kindness. Build a man that you yourself can respect. Perhaps then, others will too. She opened the door and turned back to him one last time. Bernard will show you out. Goodbye, Gideon. She left him standing there, a ghost in a room full of memories, and walked back to her study without looking back. She did not feel triumph or the satisfaction of revenge. She felt only a quiet, somber sense of closure. The last echo of her old life had finally faded. Catherine sat at her desk and picked up the proposal for the Scandinavian factory. She looked at the plans, at the future she was building, a future of her own design. A small silver frame sat on the corner of her desk, a photo she rarely looked at. It was of her parents, standing on a hillside in France, smiling. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the image of her mother, a woman of immense strength who had also known heartache. She had honored their legacy. She had survived her fire, and now the entire world was waiting for her to reshape it. And she was more than ready. And that's how a quiet, overlooked wife turned the tables on her arrogant husband in the most public way imaginable. It's a story that reminds us that true power isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's silent, patient, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Catherine didn't just reclaim her life, she claimed the empire that was rightfully hers, proving that the greatest strength often comes from being consistently underestimated. What would you have done in her position? Would you have sought such a public revenge, or handled it behind closed doors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of shocking twists and ultimate justice, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves a good revenge story. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more tales of drama and intrigue coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening. He stood on the marble dais, champagne flute raised, his arm draped around his stunning new fiancée. He was the king of his world, celebrating his victory. He toasted to a future built on a past he had callously discarded, a past that included the wife he'd left with nothing but a broken heart and a condescending check. But in the back of the grand ballroom, a shadow shifted. A figure emerged, not in tears or rags, but in a silhouette of power he hadn't seen in years. He thought he had erased her from his life, but he was about to discover she wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was his new boss, and she had just bought his future. The rain fell on the pristine windows of the penthouse apartment in a way that felt like a personal insult. It was a cold, indifferent October afternoon, the kind that mirrored the chill that had settled deep in Madeline Reed's bones. She clutched a mug of rapidly cooling tea, her knuckles white, as she stared at the 2 suitcases standing by the door like monoliths to a dead marriage. They were Italian leather, a 5th anniversary gift from her to him. Now, they were his ticket out. Ethan Vance, her husband of 8 years, straightened his tie in the reflection of the hall mirror. He adjusted the knot with a practiced ease that made her stomach clench. Every movement was precise, confident, and utterly devoid of the warmth she once cherished. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way that corporate America seemed to cultivate. A jawline that could cut glass, eyes the color of steel, and a smile that could sell sand in the desert. For years that smile had been her son. Now, it was just the baring of teeth. "Everything's in the folder on the counter, Maddie," he said, his voice casual, as if discussing a grocery list. "My lawyer, Mr. Davies, drew it up. It's generous." Madeline's eyes flickered to the thick manila folder. Inside, she knew, was the architecture of her life's demolition. The dissolution of assets, the non-disclosure agreement, the severance check. He was severing her from his life like a non-performing asset. The word generous hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Generous for 8 years of putting her own ambitions on hold? For managing their home, their social calendar, their life, so he could focus entirely on building Vance innovations? For proofreading his proposals until 3 a.m. and celebrating his every win as if it were her own? She finally found her voice, a dry, cracking thing. "Generous, Ethan? Is that what you call it?" He turned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his perfect features. "Don't be difficult, Madeline. This is for the best. We've grown apart." "People do. I'm offering you a clean break, enough to get you started somewhere new." Somewhere new. As if she were a piece of furniture he was paying to have hauled away. The truth was, sitting in the passenger seat of his Mercedes downstairs, a truth with blonde hair, a law degree from a second-tier school, and a ruthless ambition that matched Ethan's own. Jessica Sterling, a junior associate at his company, whom Madeline had hosted at their Christmas party just last year. She had smiled at Madeline, complimented her canapés, and then proceeded to dismantle her life. "We didn't grow apart, Ethan," Madeline said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "You climbed a ladder and decided I was too heavy to carry to the next rung." He actually laughed, a short, humorless bark. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. This isn't a tragedy. It's a course correction. You're smart. You'll be fine. You've been managing the household accounts for years. You're great with spreadsheets." It was the most condescending, dismissive praise he could have offered, and it was the final, sharpest cut. Her background was in financial analysis, with a degree from the University of Chicago. She'd been on a fast track at a major investment firm before she'd met him. She'd stepped back willingly, believing in the partnership they were building. He had reduced all of that education, all of that potential, to great with spreadsheets. He walked over and placed a cool hand on her shoulder. She flinched as if burned. "Look, Jessica and it's serious. We're getting engaged. I wanted to tell you before you saw it on social media." The cruelty of it stole her breath. He wasn't just leaving, he was rubbing her face in her replacement, demanding she absorb the blow with grace and dignity while he walked away unscathed. She looked up at him, her gaze clear and cold for the first time in an hour. The fog of shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a glacial rage. "Get your hand off me!" He recoiled, surprised by her tone. "Maddie! Don't call me that!" she snapped. "You don't have the right anymore. Take your generous offer and your Italian luggage and get out of this apartment." His face hardened. The mask of civility slipped, revealing the raw contempt beneath. "Fine. Have it your way. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost. The world is a cold place when you're not under my protection." He picked up his suitcases, the expensive leather making no sound on the plush Persian rug. At the door, he paused for one last look. He wasn't looking at her, but through her, already seeing the future he had planned, a future in which she was a footnote. "Goodbye, Madeline." The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the penthouse she was soon to be evicted from. Madeline stood motionless for a long time, the only sound the drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. Then, with a strangled sob, she slid down the wall to the floor, the forgotten mug of tea shattering beside her, a fitting metaphor for her shattered life. She wept until she was empty, a hollowed-out shell in a gilded cage built by a man who had just flown free. But as she sat there amidst the shards of porcelain and the ruins of her marriage, a tiny, hard kernel of something new began to form in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something colder, harder, and infinitely more durable. It was resolve. Ethan thought he was leaving her with nothing. He was wrong. He was leaving her with a motivation more powerful than any love she had ever felt for him. The burning, all-consuming need to prove him wrong. The first month was a blur of logistics and humiliation. Madeline moved out of the penthouse and into a small, sterile apartment in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. The furniture was cheap, the walls were thin, and the view was of a brick wall. She met with Ethan's lawyer, a man named Davies with reptilian eyes, who slid the final divorce papers across a mahogany table with the air of a bored executioner. She signed them without reading the fine print again. She knew what they said. They said she was no one. The check Ethan had called generous felt like blood money. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was a pittance compared to the wealth she had helped him build. But she deposited it, not as a lifeline, but as seed capital. For 2 weeks, she did nothing but exist. She slept. She ate takeout from cartons while standing in the kitchen. She watched the brick wall outside her window. She allowed herself to grieve, to feel the full, crushing weight of the betrayal. She let the anger and the pain wash over her in waves until she was numb, saturated with it. And then, one morning, she woke up and the numbness had been replaced by a chilling clarity. Ethan's parting shot echoed in her head. "You're great with spreadsheets." He meant it as an insult. She would turn it into a weapon. That day, she retrieved a dusty box from the back of her new, cramped closet. Inside were her old university textbooks on quantitative finance, corporate valuation, and market analysis. She opened one, the scent of old paper and ink filling her small apartment. It felt like coming home. Her first call was to Robert Chen, her mentor from her pre-Ethan life. Robert was a managing director at a rival investment firm, a sharp, no-nonsense man who had been deeply disappointed when she'd left her career to marry Ethan. "Madeline Reed," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and warmth when she called. "I was sorry to hear about you and Vance. The man's a fool." "He is," Madeline agreed, her voice steady. "Which is why I'm not calling for sympathy, Robert. I'm calling for a job." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Maddie, you've been out of the game for 8 years. The markets, the algorithms, they've changed entirely." "I know," she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "I'm not asking for a senior position. I'll start at the bottom. An intern, a junior analyst, I don't care. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever seen." I just need a door to open." Robert was silent for a long moment. He remembered the brilliant, hungry young analyst she had been. "There's a 6-month contract for a junior data analyst. It's a grind, long hours, terrible pay. It's beneath you." "I'll take it," she said, without hesitation. The next 4 years were a brutal, relentless climb. The junior analyst position was indeed a grind. She was older than her colleagues, who saw her as a curiosity, a divorced housewife trying to play in the big leagues. They underestimated her. That was their first mistake. Madeline worked with a single-minded ferocity that bordered on obsession. She was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. While her younger colleagues were out socializing, she was devouring white papers, studying market trends, and teaching herself new coding languages for financial modeling. She didn't just relearn the game, she mastered its new rules. Her old skills, honed by years of managing complex household finances and Ethan's social investments, had not disappeared. They had simply been dormant. Her ability to see patterns, to analyze risk, and to cut through emotional bias to the hard data was sharper than ever. She saw the market not as a series of numbers, but as a story of human fear and greed, a story she had recently learned firsthand. Robert Chen watched her with quiet approval. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he'd seen nearly a decade ago, now refined into a controlled burn. He promoted her from her contract position to a full-time analyst. Then, to senior analyst, she completed her CFA certification in record time, scoring in the top percentile globally. But she knew it wasn't enough. To truly compete at the level she was aiming for, she needed more. On top of her 70-hour work weeks, she enrolled in an executive MBA program at Columbia. Her life became a Spartan existence of work, study, and sleep. There were no vacations, no dates, no social life to speak of. Her fuel was black coffee and a cold, simmering rage that she channeled into every financial model and every case study. During her MBA, she specialized in corporate restructuring and acquisitions. It was here she found her true calling. She had a genius for identifying undervalued or mismanaged companies, companies that looked strong on the surface but were rotting from the inside. Companies, she often thought, much like her marriage had been. It was during a networking event for her program that she met Arthur Pendleton. He was the aging but still formidable chairman of the board for a massive private equity firm, Sterling Hathaway Holdings. They were known for acquiring promising tech companies, streamlining their operations, and maximizing their value. Pendleton was impressed by her incisive questions and her deep understanding of their portfolio. He offered her an internship, which she somehow managed to squeeze into her impossible schedule. At Sterling Hathaway, she wasn't just good, she was a prodigy. She identified a critical flaw in the valuation of a company they were about to acquire, saving the firm nearly $100 million. After she graduated, Pendleton didn't just offer her a job. He created a position for her in his own executive office as Director of Strategic Acquisitions. She was his right hand, his protégé. She spent the next 2 years flying across the country, dissecting companies, leading negotiations, and building a reputation as a shrewd, relentless, and impeccably prepared executive. She became Madeline Reed again, not Maddie, Ethan's wife. One rainy Tuesday, Arthur Pendleton called her into his expansive corner office overlooking Central Park. He gestured for her to sit, an unusually grave expression on his face. "Madeline," he began, steepling his fingers. "As you know, I'm planning my retirement." She nodded, her heart beginning to pound. "Yes, sir. The board has been deliberating on my successor. It's a contentious decision. But I've made my recommendation, and they've been convinced." He paused, looking at her intently. "We have a problem in our tech portfolio. A company that was once a star performer is now showing signs of significant internal rot. Bloated executive spending, declining innovation, and a CEO who seems more interested in his public image than his company's bottom line. The company is Vance Innovations." Madeline's blood ran cold. She kept her expression a perfect, unreadable mask, a skill she had perfected in hundreds of boardrooms. Pendleton continued, oblivious. "It needs a new leader. Someone ruthless enough to cut the fat, sharp enough to see the path forward, and with the personal drive to see it through. The board has approved my choice. We want you to take over as CEO, effective immediately." She felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, as if the whole world had tilted on its axis. CEO of Ethan's company, the company Sterling Hathaway had acquired a majority stake in 2 years prior, a fact she knew but had compartmentalized, focusing on other aspects of the portfolio. "There's one complication," Pendleton said, leaning forward. "Ethan Vance is a proud man. He won't take this news well. He's also about to merge his company name with his fiancée's, I believe. Sterling. He's throwing a lavish engagement party this Saturday at the Pierre Hotel to announce it to his investors and clients. It's a publicity stunt, mostly." Pendleton slid a thick, embossed invitation across his desk. "I was planning to attend and make the announcement then, a public changing of the guard. But I think it would be more effective coming from you. Let them see their new leader in the flesh. Let there be no ambiguity about who is in charge." Madeline picked up the invitation. Her name wasn't on it, of course. It was addressed to Arthur Pendleton. She stared at the elegant script announcing the engagement of Mr. Ethan Vance and Ms. Jessica Sterling. It felt like a lifetime ago that a different name had been linked with his. A slow, cold smile touched her lips for the first time in years. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of vindication, of destiny. "I agree, Arthur," she said, her voice a low, steady hum of pure, unadulterated power. "I think it's essential that I attend." The penthouse apartment Ethan now shared with Jessica Sterling was even grander than the one he'd shared with Madeline. It boasted a panoramic view of the city, all chrome, glass, and stark white furniture that looked impressive, but was deeply uncomfortable. It was a space designed to be photographed, not lived in. Much like their relationship. Ethan loosened his tie, the knot feeling unusually tight. The past year had been a tightrope walk he hadn't anticipated. On the surface, Vance Innovations was thriving. They'd landed 2 major contracts, and their press was glowing. But beneath the surface, the foundations were cracking. R&D was lagging. Their top engineers were being poached by competitors, and their profit margins were being squeezed thin by extravagant, Jessica-approved expenses. The new marketing wing, the Sterling part of the future, Vance and Sterling, was Jessica's domain, and it was a black hole for cash, producing glossy brochures and social media campaigns that generated buzz but few actual sales. He was counting on the engagement party to be more than a celebration. It was a strategic maneuver. By publicly linking his name with Jessica's, and by extension her family's old money name, he hoped to project an image of unshakable stability. He needed to dazzle the investors, especially the representatives from Sterling Hathaway Holdings, the private equity firm that had bought a controlling stake 2 years ago. They had been patient so far, but he could feel their scrutiny tightening. The upcoming board review was a source of constant, gnawing anxiety. "Is that the seating chart again, darling?" Jessica's voice, manicured and smooth, cut through his thoughts. She glided into the room, holding up 2 shimmering gowns. "The silver Armani or the gold Valentino?" I want to look like a queen when we make our announcement." Ethan glanced at the spreadsheet on his tablet, a complex web of anxieties disguised as a seating chart. He had placed Arthur Pendleton, the chairman of Sterling Hathaway, at his own table, a place of honor. "The gold," he said absently. "It's more impactful." "Good choice." She draped the gold dress over a chair and came to stand behind him, her hands massaging his shoulders. Her touch felt possessive, proprietary. "Stop worrying about the party. Everything is perfect. The caterer is the best in the city. The champagne is vintage, and everyone who's anyone will be there. This is our moment, Ethan. The official launch of the Vance and Sterling dynasty." He forced a smile. "You're right. It will be perfect." But a sliver of unease remained. It was a faint, almost imperceptible memory of a different kind of support. He remembered late nights with Madeline, her poring over his financial projections, her sharp mind finding flaws he'd missed, her quiet encouragement feeling like a bedrock beneath him. Jessica offered enthusiasm, but not substance. When he tried to talk to her about the pressure from the board or a new competitor's product launch, her eyes would glaze over, and she'd deftly change the subject to flower arrangements or their summer plans for the Hamptons. "I spoke to my father today," Jessica said, her voice taking on a tone of casual importance. "He's so thrilled. He said he always knew I'd land on my feet after that. Unpleasantness at my old firm." Ethan stiffened. The unpleasantness she referred to was an ethics complaint filed against her for poaching clients, the real reason she'd left her law career to join his company as a marketing consultant. He had made that problem go away, a fact she seemed to conveniently forget. "And did you remember to send an invitation to your ex-wife?" she asked, her voice laced with a sweet, venomous curiosity. Ethan looked up, startled. "Madeline? Why on earth would I do that?" Jessica gave a tinkling laugh. "For closure, darling. To show her how well you're doing. To show her there are no hard feelings. It's the classy, powerful thing to do. Let her see what she lost. Let her see us, happy and successful. It's the final win." He considered it. The idea was petty, cruel, and utterly compelling. He hadn't spoken to Madeline since the day he'd left. He'd heard through the grapevine that she'd taken some low-level job somewhere, just as he'd predicted. She had probably faded back into the anonymity from which he'd plucked her. Sending her an invitation would be like salting a wound, a final, triumphant declaration of his superiority. It appealed to the ugliest part of his nature. "Where would I even send it?" he mused, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his face. "Oh, I have her address," Jessica said breezily. "I had my assistant track it down a while ago, just in case we needed to send her any leftover legal documents." The casual way she admitted to having his ex-wife surveilled should have been a red flag. But to Ethan, it just felt like another sign of Jessica's thoroughness. He pictured Madeline, alone in some drab little apartment, receiving the opulent invitation. He imagined her quiet despair, her bitter jealousy. The thought gave him a dark, satisfying thrill. "All right," he said, pulling up his email. "Let's give her a front-row seat to our future." He typed out a short, condescendingly polite email, attached a digital copy of the invitation, and hit send. He felt a surge of power, of finality. It was the last ghost of his old life, now properly exorcised. Later that evening, as he stood with Jessica on their balcony, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, he felt a supreme, unassailable confidence. His beautiful fiancée was on his arm. His name was on the verge of being immortalized in the corporate world, and his past was firmly where it belonged, in the rearview mirror. "To Vance and Sterling," Jessica said, clinking her champagne flute against his. "To us," he replied, kissing her. But as he looked out at the vast, indifferent city, he couldn't shake a tiny, cold flicker in the pit of his stomach. It was the feeling of a man standing on a trap door, admiring the view, completely unaware of the lever being pulled 1,000 miles away. The celebration was set, the guests were invited, and the stage was prepared. But he had fundamentally miscast the star of the show. The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Madeline was in her sparse, functional apartment in a high-rise that valued security over charm. She was reviewing a due diligence report for a potential acquisition in the biotech sector. A tangle of data she was methodically unraveling. The apartment was her sanctuary and her command center, a place devoid of personal artifacts, save for a framed photo of her late parents on her nightstand. There were no ghosts of her past life here. She had made sure of it. The notification pinged, a soft, unobtrusive sound. The subject line was deceptively simple. An invitation. The sender was Ethan Vance. Her heart didn't leap or sink. It simply stopped for a single, frozen second before resuming its steady, disciplined rhythm. For a moment, she thought it might be a legal matter, some loose end from the divorce. She clicked it open. The email was short, dripping with false bonhomie. "Madeline, hope this finds you well. It's been some time. As I embark on the next chapter of my life, I wanted to extend an invitation to my engagement party this Saturday. Jessica and I would be pleased if you could join us to celebrate. I've always wished you the best, and this felt like a chance for a positive new beginning for everyone. All the details are in the attached invitation. Best, Ethan, positive new beginning. Wished you the best." The lies were so bald-faced they were almost comical. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a dagger wrapped in silk. It was a summons to witness his triumph, a command performance for her own humiliation. He wanted her to see Jessica's ring, to hear the toasts to their glorious future, to feel the full weight of what he had deemed her unworthy of. Her cursor hovered over the attachment. With a steady hand, she clicked it open. The invitation bloomed on her screen, a confection of gold leaf and swirling calligraphy. "Mr. Ethan Vance and Ms. Jessica Sterling request the pleasure of your company to celebrate their engagement." The venue was the Pierre, the time 8 p.m. It was the most expensive, ostentatious, and public way he could possibly have chosen to twist the knife. She leaned back in her chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating her face. There was no pain. The woman who would have been shattered by this invitation had died 4 years ago in a penthouse filled with Italian luggage. The woman reading it now was someone else entirely. She was a creation of spreadsheets, boardrooms, and brutal self-discipline. She was a CEO in waiting. A slow, icy calm washed over her. Jessica's name being Sterling had always been a bitter irony. Now it was a poetic one. They were celebrating the joining of their names, Vance and Sterling, completely oblivious that Sterling Hathaway Holdings, her firm, owned the stage on which they were about to perform. Her phone buzzed. It was Robert Chen. "Did you see the latest quarterly report from Vance Innovations?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Ethan's bleeding cash. The spending on his new marketing division is astronomical. The board must be having a fit." "They are," Madeline said coolly, her eyes still on the invitation. "That's why they're making a change." "A change? What kind of change?" Madeline allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. "I just received a personal invitation to his engagement party on Saturday." Robert was silent for a moment, processing. "He invited you? That arrogant son of a—" He caught himself. "Why would you even consider going?" What's the point, Madeline? You've already won. You don't need to stoop to his level. This isn't about stooping, Robert. It's about establishing a clear chain of command, she said, her voice dropping to the low, authoritative tone she used in high-stakes negotiations. Arthur Pendleton was going to announce my appointment as CEO at that party. He thought it would be a powerful statement. My God, Robert breathed. But he's agreed to let me do it my own way, Madeline continued. Ethan and Jessica are throwing this party to project an image of power and stability to their investors. They are creating a public forum, filled with the very people whose confidence they need. They've built the stage, sent out the invitations, and chosen the spotlight. I'm simply going to step into it. He'll be blindsided. It will be a bloodbath. It will be a corporate restructuring, she corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. He is a liability to the company and a threat to the shareholders' investment. My feelings about him as a man are irrelevant. My assessment of him as a CEO is what matters. This is just an efficient way to handle the transition. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. It was justice, served on a silver platter he had paid for himself. It was the final, definitive closing of a chapter, written in ink of his own making. Be careful, Madeline, Robert said softly. Don't let the satisfaction of the moment cloud your judgment for what comes after. The moment is the point, Robert, she replied. It's about optics. It's about sending a message not just to Ethan, but to every single person in that room, that the era of vanity and mismanagement at Vance Innovations is over. A new protocol is being initiated. After she hung up, she stared at the invitation again. Ethan had intended it as a final act of cruelty. He had summoned the ghost of his past to witness his glory. He had no idea he had just sent a gilded summons to his own executioner. She opened her closet, bypassing the simple, dark business suits she wore daily. In the very back, preserved in a garment bag, was a single evening gown she had bought for an awards dinner 2 years ago, and never worn. It was a deep, midnight blue, exquisitely tailored, and shimmered under the light like a star-filled sky. It was a dress that radiated power. It was perfect. The Pierre Hotel exuded an aura of old-world opulence. Crystal chandeliers weighing as much as small cars hung from the frescoed ceilings of the grand ballroom, casting a warm, golden light over the city's elite. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and peonies, punctuated by the cheerful clinking of champagne flutes and the low hum of self-important conversation. It was a room built for kings and queens of industry, a stage for the city's grandest dramas. Ethan Vance stood at the center of it all, a beacon of success. His tuxedo was bespoke, his smile was dazzling, and Jessica Sterling clung to his arm, radiant in her gold Valentino gown, a massive diamond winking on her finger. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations and air kisses, their laughter echoing slightly too loud, their confidence a brittle, lacquered shell. "Arthur Pendleton's office called," Jessica whispered excitedly into Ethan's ear as they greeted a banking executive. "He's running late, but his car is on the way. He wouldn't miss this for the world." Ethan felt a surge of relief. Pendleton's presence was the ultimate endorsement. With the chairman of Sterling Hathaway smiling upon their union, the investors would be putty in his hands. Tonight was going perfectly. It was his masterpiece, a symphony of power, wealth, and love. He scanned the entrance, a part of him still looking for a ghost. He wondered if Madeline had received his email. He hoped she had. He hoped she was sitting in her tiny apartment, eating a meal for one, imagining this very scene and feeling the sting of her own mediocrity. The thought was a petty but undeniable pleasure. It was then that the doors to the ballroom opened again. A woman stood silhouetted in the entrance, and for a heartbeat, the ambient noise of the room seemed to dip. She was not announced. She did not need to be. She commanded attention simply by standing still. She wore a gown the color of a midnight sky, a stark, elegant contrast to the sea of gold, silver, and crimson in the room. It was cut with an architectural precision that highlighted a strength he had never known she possessed. Her dark hair, which she used to wear long and soft, was styled in a chic, severe bob that framed a face he almost didn't recognize. The soft, accommodating features he remembered were gone, replaced by a calm, formidable composure. Her eyes, when they swept the room, were not wide and wounded. They were sharp, analytical, and missed nothing. Ethan's smile froze on his face. His champagne flute felt suddenly heavy in his hand. It was Madeline. But it was not. It was a stranger wearing his ex-wife's face. Jessica followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. "Who is that? Do we know her?" Then recognition dawned, followed by a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Oh my God, it's her! She actually came! How pathetic! Look at her! Probably spent her last dime on that dress to try and compete." But Ethan wasn't listening. He saw the way a few influential venture capitalists, people he'd been trying to get a meeting with for months, straightened up as she entered. He saw the head of a major tech publication subtly nod in her direction, a gesture of respect. Something was wrong. This wasn't the picture of the lonely, forgotten ex-wife he had so gleefully painted in his mind. Madeline didn't search the crowd for him. She moved with a quiet, unhurried grace, her gaze sweeping the room as if she were performing an environmental assessment. She accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter, ignoring the champagne. An older, distinguished-looking man, whom Ethan vaguely recognized as a board member from a rival tech firm, immediately approached her. They spoke in low, familiar tones. He laughed at something she said. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of Ethan's triumphant haze. This was not the script. She was supposed to be a wallflower, a pitiable figure that would only serve to highlight his own brilliance. Instead, she was drawing a subtle but undeniable gravitational pull. "I'm going to go say hello," Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's only polite to welcome the less fortunate." Before Ethan could stop her, Jessica detached herself from his arm and glided towards Madeline, her gold dress a shimmering banner of war. Ethan watched, his heart thudding against his ribs, as Jessica intercepted Madeline near a towering floral arrangement. "Madeline?" Jessica purred, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm so surprised you could make it. It's so brave of you to come. Ethan and I are just thrilled you're here to share in our happiness." Madeline turned to face her. She looked Jessica up and down, her expression not of jealousy, but of mild, clinical appraisal. It was the look one gives a piece of art that is technically proficient, but ultimately soulless. "Jessica," Madeline said, her voice calm and even, holding none of the tremor of a woman confronted by her replacement. "It's an impressive party. The overhead on an event like this must be substantial. I hope it was budgeted for in the quarterly marketing expenses." The businesslike comment threw Jessica completely off balance. "Well, it's a celebration, not a business meeting." "For some of us," Madeline replied smoothly, "everything is a business meeting." At that moment, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a man stepped up to the microphone on the small stage. It was not Arthur Pendleton. It was another senior board member of Sterling Hathaway, a man named George Carmichael. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention," George began, his voice booming through the sound system. Ethan felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Where was Pendleton? Why was Carmichael making the announcement? We are all here tonight to celebrate a new union, a joining of two names, Vance and Sterling, George continued, smiling out at the crowd. And in that spirit of new beginnings, Sterling Hathaway Holdings has an important announcement to make regarding the future leadership of one of its most promising assets, Vance Innovations. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Ethan and Jessica exchanged a bewildered look. This wasn't part of the plan. While Mr. Ethan Vance has navigated the company through a period of growth, George said, the praise sounding suspiciously like a eulogy, the board has decided that for the next phase of its evolution, a new vision is required, a new leader with a proven track record in strategic restructuring and aggressive market expansion. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The entire room was silent, every eye fixed on the stage. Our chairman, Mr. Arthur Pendleton, sends his deepest regrets that he could not be here. He is in fact officially on his retirement holiday as of this morning, George announced. But he and the entire board are unanimous in their choice for the new Chief Executive Officer of Vance Innovations. She is a woman of formidable talent and unwavering resolve, and we are thrilled to welcome her. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new CEO of Vance Innovations, Ms. Madeline Reed. George Carmichael turned and gestured, not to the side of the stage, but directly into the crowd, directly at the woman in the midnight blue dress. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Every head swiveled in unison. The spotlight, which had been prepared for Ethan and Jessica's triumphant toast, swung across the room and landed squarely on Madeline. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, bathed in the white light, her expression calm, her gaze fixed directly on Ethan. Jessica Sterling stood frozen beside her, her mouth agape, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking garish and pale in her glittering gold dress. For Ethan, the world dissolved into a roaring tunnel of sound. The clinking glasses, the music, the whispers, it all faded away, replaced by the thunderous pounding of his own blood in his ears. He looked at Madeline, really looked at her, and saw not the woman he had left, but the architect of his demise. He had sent an invitation to his party, and she had responded by taking his company. He had planned a celebration of his future, and it had just become the public execution of his career. In the center of the silent, stunned ballroom, Madeline met his gaze across the room. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of triumph or malice, it was a gesture of finality, a confirmation. The books were balanced, the debt had been paid, the party did not so much end as it shattered. The announcement hung in the air like the smoke after an explosion, and the guests, a mix of investors, clients, and socialites, reacted with a flurry of frantic whispers. Alliances were reassessed, business cards were discreetly pocketed, and a wide berth was given to the smoldering crater where Ethan and Jessica stood. They had become radioactive. Jessica was the first to break. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of social grace, crumpled into undisguised fury. "What did you do?" she hissed at Ethan, her voice a venomous whisper. "You told me everything was fine. You told me the board loved you." I don't know," Ethan stammered, his mind reeling. He couldn't process the reality of the situation. Madeline. His quiet, unassuming Madeline was the new CEO. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. "You've ruined us." Jessica's voice rose, attracting more stares. "My name is attached to this humiliation. Vance and Sterling? It's a joke!" Without another word, she turned and stormed away, her gold dress trailing behind her like a tarnished banner, leaving Ethan alone in the wreckage of his own making. Madeline, meanwhile, was surrounded. The same venture capitalists and executives who had been giving Ethan polite nods were now eagerly shaking her hand, their voices a low murmur of congratulations and strategic inquiries. She handled them with an unnerving calm, her answers crisp and professional. She wasn't celebrating. She was holding her first informal board meeting. She left without a backward glance at Ethan. She didn't need to. The damage was done, the message delivered with surgical precision. The following Monday morning was grey and foreboding, the sky the colour of concrete. Ethan arrived at the headquarters of Vance Innovations, feeling like a condemned man walking to his own execution. The receptionist, who usually greeted him with a beaming smile, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and fear, her eyes darting away as he passed. The entire office was shrouded in a tense, oppressive silence. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main conference room, a glass-walled enclosure on the top floor that was nicknamed the Fishbowl. When Ethan entered, the board members were already seated around the long, polished granite table. They avoided his eyes. At the head of the table, in the large leather chair that had been his, sat Madeline. She was dressed in a severe, dark grey suit, her hair pulled back. She looked every inch the CEO. There was no trace of the woman he had married, no hint of shared history in her cool, dispassionate gaze. Before her was a tablet and a single file folder. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the silent room. "Please have a seat." The act of sitting down in a subordinate's chair at the table he once commanded was the first of 1,000 small humiliations he would endure that day. Madeline did not waste time with pleasantries. She began the meeting immediately. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, a leadership transition has been initiated by the board of Sterling Hathaway. My mandate is to address the fiscal and operational inefficiencies within Vance Innovations and to steer the company back to a path of sustainable profitability. Let's begin with the Q3 expenditure reports." With a tap on her tablet, the large screen at the end of the room lit up with a series of charts and graphs that were horrifyingly clear. It was a systematic dissection of his failures. She pointed out the spiraling costs of the marketing department, headed by Jessica, showing its negligible return on investment. She highlighted the declining R&D budget, correlating it directly with the loss of 2 key engineers and a critical patent filing that had been beaten to the punch by a competitor. She spoke in a calm, measured monotone, using terms like fiscal irresponsibility, misallocation of resources, and brand dilution. She never once made it personal. She didn't have to. The numbers did it for her. She presented the data not as an accusation, but as an unassailable fact, an autopsy of his leadership. Ethan felt his face flush with shame and impotent rage. He tried to interject, to defend his decisions. The marketing spend was about building brand prestige, he began, his voice sounding weak even to his own ears. The brand's prestige is derived from its innovation and profitability, Mr. Vance. Not the vintage of the champagne served at its parties. Madeline cut him off coolly, not even bothering to look at him. She addressed the board. The party on Saturday evening, for example. I've reviewed the invoices. $250,000, billed to the corporate account as a client and investor relations event. An event, I might add, that resulted in a catastrophic loss of investor confidence. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. They had all been there. They were all complicit in enjoying the largesse. Now they looked at him as if he were a stranger who had stolen their wallets. He was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, with the cold, impersonal tools of the corporate world he loved. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, each one delivered with the precision of a surgeon. When she was finished, the case against him was absolute. He expected her to fire him. He almost wished for it, a quick, clean end. But Madeline had something far more punishing in mind. Effective immediately, the marketing department will be dissolved, and its functions absorbed by sales and product development, she announced. All non-essential executive perks are suspended. And Mr. Vance, she finally turned her eyes on him, her gaze as sharp and cold as ice. You will be reassigned. A stunned silence filled the room. You will be taking on the role of Vice President of Special Projects, she continued. Your first project will be to personally oversee the liquidation of the assets from the now defunct marketing division. You will report directly to me. Your performance will be reviewed on a weekly basis. It was a master stroke of corporate cruelty. She wasn't firing him. She was demoting him, humiliating him, forcing him to clean up the very mess he had made with his mistress. She was putting him on a corporate leash, forcing him to witness firsthand as she undid all of his work and rebuilt the company in her own image. He would have to sit in meetings and watch her command the respect he had lost. He would have to call her Ms. Reed. He looked around the table for any sign of support, but found only stony faces. He had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. Do you accept the new role, Mr. Vance? Madeline asked, her tone making it clear it was not a question. He swallowed the bile that rose in his throat. His pride, his ego, his entire sense of self screamed at him to quit, to walk out, and never look back. But he couldn't. His finances were tied up in company stock options that hadn't vested. Jessica, he knew, would be gone the moment the money dried up. He was trapped. Through clenched teeth, he managed to choke out the single word that sealed his fate. Yes. Madeline gave a curt nod, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Good. My assistant will send you the details of your new office assignment. It's on the 4th floor. The meeting is adjourned. She stood up and walked out of the boardroom without a second glance. The other board members filed out after her, leaving Ethan alone in the cavernous, silent room. He stared at his reflection in the polished table, but the confident, powerful man he expected to see was gone. In his place was a pale, defeated stranger. He had once stood at the top of the world and sneered at the woman below. Now he was at the bottom, looking up, and the view was unbearable. 6 months passed, and spring breathed new life into the city. A similar revitalization was underway at the newly rebranded Innovate Dynamics. The culture of excess was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus on results. Madeline was a formidable CEO, leading not with charisma, but with unassailable competence. The company was thriving, its stock price steadily climbing. Ethan, meanwhile, languished. His office was a windowless cubicle on the 4th floor, his title of VP of Special Projects, a corporate joke. He was a ghost, haunting the halls of the empire he'd lost, forced to witness its flourishing without him. Jessica had vanished the week after the party, her final communication, a text calling him a bad investment. He had lost everything. The inevitable summons came on a rainy Friday. He stood before her in the corner office he once occupied. The space was now minimalist and functional, a reflection of its new occupant. Madeline stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the skyline. "Ethan," she said, turning to face him. Her gaze was not triumphant, but dispassionate. "Your contract is up for review. The board is eliminating your position." This was it. The final, quiet cut. He just nodded, the fight long gone out of him. "There's a severance package," she continued, gesturing to a folder on her desk. "It's adequate." The echo of his own cruel words from years ago landed with a sickening thud. He finally found his voice, the question that had haunted him for months. "Why, Madeline? Was all of this just for revenge?" A thoughtful expression crossed her face. When you left, you said the world was a cold place without your protection. You thought you were my son, but you were the eclipse, Ethan. You were the shadow I was living in. When you left, you didn't take the light away. You finally let it in. She met his gaze, her voice calm and certain. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for me. I did it to become the person I was always meant to be. You just happened to be standing in the way. There was nothing he could say. He had been a villain in her story, but only a minor one. A catalyst, not the cause. His downfall wasn't her goal. It was merely a consequence of her rise. He took the folder and walked to the door. With his hand on the handle, he looked back one last time. She had already turned back to the window, her attention on the sprawling city below, her gaze fixed on the future. He was already a memory. Ethan stepped out of the office and into the anonymous rain, a man erased from his own life, leaving Madeline Reed alone at the top, finally free of the shadows. And so, the story of Madeline Reed and Ethan Vance comes to a close. It's a raw, powerful reminder that the people we discard can often possess a strength we never bothered to see. Madeline's journey wasn't just about revenge, it was about rebirth. She transformed her deepest pain into her greatest power. Not to destroy her ex-husband, but to build herself into someone he could never have imagined. This story shows us that true victory isn't about getting even, but about getting ahead, on your own terms. What did you think of Madeline's ultimate power move? Was it cold-hearted justice, or the most inspiring comeback story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible tale of transformation and vindication, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.